Go for it.
Awesome. I'm recording. So my first question for you is how did you become a communications and content specialist at, is it pronounced slalom?
Slalom. Yeah, it's a weird
Slalom.
name. Yeah, so a little bit of my background. So I graduated from UF right before the pandemic started. So like December 2019. Got my bachelor's in PR, my minor in women's studies, and I didn't really know what to do with it. I didn't know what industry I felt tied to. My previous internships, I had worked at an international PR firm and worked on the healthcare team. So I originally started out in healthcare at UF Health, actually, on their strategic communications team. Started there for a year and a half, loved it, but the pandemic just had me working like three people's jobs. Obviously, it was very different than what I expected. I moved into finance from there. So I worked at Citibank for a little under a year. And then, kind of towards the end of that year, I wasn't loving the work life balance. It was my first hybrid job, and I wanted something that was completely remote. So I was on LinkedIn. I hadn't heard of Slalom yet, but it turns out that one of my friends, her sister, works at their Miami office as a consultant. So I called her up and asked her about the company. And she just told me the work life balance was great. I could most likely be completely remote, which I am now. So I found a recruiter on LinkedIn that was advertising this position, and she had posted like 3 weeks prior. So I wasn't sure if it was even open. So I did some like Googling. I found her email. I sent her my cover letter and resume, and she kind of like pushed me to the right recruiter. And within like 3 weeks, I had an offer. So it was a very quick turnaround time. So I've been in this position. Next month it'll be 6 months, so I'm a little over 5 months now. But it's incredible. It feels like a startup. It's one of the smaller companies I've worked at. We're like 13,000 employees right now. So our communications team is pretty small. It's really just me and my manager, and then we have a separate marketing team that does the social media. But yeah, I'm loving it. It's interesting to go from different industries and kind of larger companies to have more of that kind of startup feel.
Mhm. Yeah,
That's
for
awesome.
sure.
That sounds very exciting. My name is Leonardo.
Nice
It's
to
nice to
meet
meet
you.
you. And I'm gonna ask you the second question we have for you. How important is culture in your field, and how has that impacted your day-to-day work with people from other cultures?
Yeah, that's a great question. Culture impacts everything, especially in communications. So, for example, when I worked in finance, we kind of learned that of all of our regions, APAC, like the Asian countries, they had lower readership on our newsletters that we would send every other week. So we would actually see that they were in like the 30% for readership of actually opening the email, and the other regions were like in the 70s. So we were trying to figure out what the cause of that was and trying to figure out the best way to communicate kind of important updates to those areas. And we learned that culturally, our employees in those areas, they like to receive information from their managers. So they're more likely to go to their managers for information versus checking their inbox and searching for that week's newsletter. So it really impacts everything about how we communicate. I would also say internally as a company, it matters. Having visibility matters. Working with people that look like you and are from places that are similar to your background, and the opposite, working with people who aren't like you is equally important. So I think I saw a statistic when I joined this company that like upwards of 60% of women these days, when they are looking for jobs at companies, they're looking at pictures of the executive board and seeing how many women are on the board, and also seeing how many people of color are on the board. And I think that's just very relevant for right now, to appreciate different cultures. And we can't send well-rounded communications, and we can't meet people where they're at if we are not doing our research and we don't, reflect our audience internally.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Maite, and the question that I have for you is, do you speak any other languages? Have you ever had a need to communicate with someone in another language and you benefited from knowing a different language? Or have you ever not been able to communicate with someone because you didn't have that skill and it was a little bit more of a hard time?
Sure, that's a great question. I wish I was bilingual or trilingual. I have tried Spanish, and the closest I got was I did a study abroad when I was at UF in undergrad. So I lived with a family in the Yucatan Peninsula for a summer, and that was the best my Spanish ever got. So it was somewhat fluent, and I wish I kept up with it, but I didn't. I would say it's super, super helpful, especially in Florida. When I was like job hunting, if you want to work in communications, like in South Florida, you kind of need to be bilingual. Like there were some offices for Weber Shandwick, they have a Miami office, and that's where I interned when I was a junior in DC. And if you want to work in their Miami office, like you have to be, because how else are you going to speak to your audience? So it's definitely super important. In my job now, I think there was like a recent law just in Canada in general. Anytime we have a Canada specific communication, we also need to allot for time in the planning process to have a French translation of that communication. So it really affects everything. The timelines, you have to factor in that additional time. And especially with my company, since I feel like we're growing almost faster than we can keep up with. So we are having to refine those timelines when we work with our Canadian teams to ensure that we're following all the laws and ensuring that all of the messaging is very inclusive for everybody that speaks, any language. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Thank you.
So your company, the company that you work for, is an international consulting company. So you've worked with people from different countries. Can you tell us like what you've noticed about working with professionals from cultures that are different from your own and the one you grew up in?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for background, my specific team, it's about 10 people, and most of them are based out of Seattle. So from the start, even just the time difference, I think has been really interesting. I've always either worked in person or worked with people in my time zone. So coming into this company, just something very basic, everyone's signatures say, my working hours are not your working hours. So please respond when it's convenient for you. So kind of working in a space where everyone is understanding that my 9 to 5 is not your 9 to 5. Also, when I collaborate with our marketing team, holding, certain dates when it comes to sending emails to ensure that we're not sending emails like globally when there is, a big cultural holiday coming up or a holiday that impacts a specific region. We're pretty good about getting in front of that and not scheduling any communications that day out of respect. So I would say those are kind of the major things. I don't know if I've had, any necessarily negative experiences or ones that stand out where I was, working with someone that came from such a different cultural background. I would like to say that I work with a lot of people, mostly within North America. So I work a lot with our Canadian teams. But in my previous jobs, I worked a lot with our employees in APAC. And besides the time difference, and just how they like to receive, in my experience, how they like to receive information, coming from a manager versus an email. I think that's the only thing I noticed. Certain, people, and it varies across industries, they'd prefer like a phone call versus pinging them or sending them an email. So I think just how they, take in information, it's definitely, cultural.
Yeah, for sure.
We also wanted to ask you, what can we as aspiring professionals, what can we do to succeed in the global communications field? Yeah,
no, that's a great question. And it sounds, I hate saying it because it's such a basic answer, but networking is really the best thing you can do. I think like even for this job, for me, I reached out to a recruiter whose email I found. Like I didn't even have LinkedIn Premium, so I couldn't even ping her or DM her there. I had to find her email and reach out to her that way. And that really is what opened the door to this new opportunity for me. I just think people and you've probably seen this, Eve, because you reached out and I was excited to chat with you all. Everyone is excited to invest in people, regardless of if they're younger than you or not. If you find someone that's working your dream job, I really encourage you to reach out to them because it really is a compliment. The worst they can say is, I don't have time, and then they'll just refer you to someone else. So I think one of the best things you can do is do more of this, even just to find 5 or 10 minutes to pick somebody's brain that you found on LinkedIn or you found on Facebook, just to see, how they got that job and what advice they have for you is probably the best thing you can do.
That's awesome. I actually have a question.
Mhm.
that was not in our planned question.
Sure.
So, what exactly does your job entail? Like, what does
Yeah.
communications, in your case, entail? What do you have to do? Who do you communicate with, I guess?
Yeah, yeah. Communications is such a broad term. So when I got my bachelor's in public relations, I assumed that meant that I would be like a social media manager for the rest of my life, or writing press releases every day. And I, for the most part, really don't do any of that. So I've always worked since I graduated on the internal communication side. So that mostly means my audience are my coworkers. So I'm communicating to the company's employees. So a lot of that is newsletters to some of our audiences. So I mostly work on our global people team, so essentially our HR teams. So a lot of my emails are informational emails from our chief people officer, so executive communications. Next month we have open enrollment coming up, so it's time for everyone to choose their benefits again for the next year. So that's a big campaign I'm working on, and that goes to about 9,000 employees, because we're targeting all of our US employees, and we're mostly, most of our employees are American. So a lot of it is executive communications. Occasionally I'll help our chief people officer with her LinkedIn presence. She's really funny. She's like not a social media person at all, and she just wants someone to write little posts for her on LinkedIn. So I help with that as well. And I think a big part of being in communications, especially when you work with people who don't have a communications background, they kind of expect you to wear a lot of hats. So I think when I say I do communications, a part of that is also project management. So kind of when someone comes to me and says, we need an email sent out to, X, Y, and Z population, I'm the person that's contacting, the next steps and detailing the next steps for them, creating a timeline of when they can expect the first draft, etc. So it's interesting because this is my first job where I'm the only communications person on my team. Because in previous jobs, I was like one of 5 on an internal comms team, and now it's just me. So people come to me for communications advice, and I have to be very confident in my answer. And then I partner with our marketing team as well to help with sending out different emails and things like that. It doesn't sound very interesting, but it's pretty fun.
No, it
No,
does.
it sounds cool.
Sounds cool.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much all the questions we have. We're almost at the 15-minute mark, but I just wanted to say thank you again so much, Molly, for doing this and for sharing all of your experiences and stuff. Like, it sounds, you said it doesn't sound cool, but I think it does. And,
It sounds cool to other comms people, I guess. Like when I have to explain to my friends who are in STEM, like what I do, they're like, emails? And I'm like, you would think like there's a beauty to it. There's a science behind it. It's fun for me to write. I enjoy writing and structuring things and partnering with people who don't have communications backgrounds, and getting their insights. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. But thank you for all of your time. It was so nice meeting you. Feel free to email me or connect with me on LinkedIn if you all have any questions about my company or just any other experiences I've had since I graduated. More than happy to help you all out.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Have a great
Thanks,
rest of your day.
everyone.
And a
You
good
too.
weekend.
Bye.
Bye.
All right.